Okay, welcome to another video lecture. Our next topic is production and growth from the book of Three Principles of Macroeconomics by N. Gregory Mankiw. Okay, it has come to my mind to work abroad, to learn about architectural practices in foreign countries. But I always weigh my options. Ganun ako. Of course, if ever I work abroad, it is not just to learn, but also to save. I want to save. So, to stay here, how much will I save compared to working, let's say, Japan? Diba? And one of my biggest consideration is the standard of living. Of course, I do my research. How much is the minimum wage? How much is the average living expenses? Of course, countries like Australia, US, Germany, they have 10 times bigger average income compared to countries like ours, the Philippines. And it reflects to the quality of life of people living there. Of course, they have better nutrition, di ba? That's why ang mga tao sa kanila is malalaki, di ba? They have better healthcare. They are happier. Have you encountered the most happiest countries, di ba? On top was Finland. Okay, the last time I know. Okay, the last time I knew. Okay. Also, they have better quality of education. Ganun naman talaga. In the United States, the average income increased by 2% per year based on the real GDP, okay, which doubles every 35 years based on their data. So it implies that better economic prosperity, okay? Ang mga nasa present generation, they experience better economic prosperity than any other generation. Let's say, like the grandparents, di ba? Compared to their parents or great-grandparents. Also, growth rates, it varies from country to country. Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, they experience economic growth of di ba, 7% okay, per year. Okay, which doubles every 10 years. Okay, ang kanilang average income. Okay, and China, we're familiar with China. Okay, it has enjoyed to even higher rate of 12%. And by contrast, no, if these countries that we've mentioned, they experience economic growth, by contrast, some countries like the African countries, they remain stagnant. Okay, countries like Zimbabwe, okay, data from 1991 to 2011, it fell 38%. So what does this mean? No? Mas mahirap ang current generation, mas nahihirapan. So we have here diverse economic progression. Okay? So how can rich countries maintain their high standard of living? Okay? Yun ang question natin. And what policies should poor countries pursue to promote more growth, okay, in the macroeconomics? Okay. So in our chapter, okay, production and growth, we will discuss how economists measure macroeconomic quantities and prices. Okay, so we will study the forces that determine these variables. Okay, we're familiar with GDP, right? The gross domestic product. GDP measures both the total income earned in the economy and also the expenditure in the economy's output of goods and services. So when we look at economic progression or economic prosperity, okay, the level of the real GDP is a good gauge, okay, a good measurement. And the growth of real GDP, okay, is a good gauge to measure, yes, the prosperity, economic prosperity, and the progress. Okay, so as we proceed, we will examine international data on the real GDP per person, which will give us a sense of how much the level of growth and living standards vary around the world. Second, we will examine the role of productivity. Okay? Productivity, which means the amount of goods and services produced for each hour of workers' time. Okay? It's because we see a country's standard of living, okay, is determined by the productivity of its workers, di ba? Um, Progressive ang country pag productive ang mga tao okay, na naka-reside sa country. Okay? And we'll also look into the factors that determine a nation's productivity. Okay? And then, we will consider the link between productivity and the economic policies that a nation pursues. Okay, economic growth around the world. Let's insert another table. Okay, we have here a table which shows the data on real GDP per person of these 13 countries. Okay, so in each country we have a century of history. Okay, so let's just update what we have from the book of N. Gregory Mankiw. This is from 2008 pa. Okay, 1890, okay, 1900s to 2008. So let's just update it. Okay, let's look at the table. So we have here countries, okay, a list of countries and the period from 1890, okay, 1900s, 1870 to 2010. And then here we have a column, the real GDP per person from the start of the period. So meaning, let's say for Japan, from the start of 1890, okay? And then here we have another column in which it shows the real GDP per person at the end of the period. Okay, so by 2010, the GDP per person in country, let's say the Japan, okay, it shows, okay, at the end of the period, the year 2010, okay, the real GDP per person. And then the last column, it shows the growth rate per year. Okay, let's compare this. Okay, let's look at real GDP per person at the beginning of the period. Okay, the data on real GDP per person show the living standards, okay, which vary from country to country. Okay, so let's look at countries like United States. Let's compare it with India. Okay, so at the beginning, okay, United States, okay, in the year 1870, okay, real GDP per person is at $4,044. Okay, and while India, so low, okay, one of the underdeveloped countries, it's at 681, okay, real GDP per person. Okay, but, okay, let's compare, okay, let's compare again at the end of the period by 2010, okay? United States, it's at $47,210, while India, it's at 3,330. Okay, malayo pa rin, di ba? So makita mo ang difference of living standards of this rich country, okay, and the poor country, such as India. Okay? The poorest countries have average level of income, okay, not seen in the developed world for many decades. Okay? So, the typical citizen of India, okay, had less real income than the typical resident of England. Okay? So, di ba? Tignan natin, ang income sa United Kingdom, even at the start of the period at 4,853, okay, hindi pa rin maabot ni India by the end of the period. which is still, no? It's at 3,330. Okay, di ba? Makita mo talaga, okay, these poor countries, how they develop compared to these rich countries. Okay, let's look at the growth rate. Okay, the growth rate dictates how the real GDP per person grew, okay, per year. Okay, the increase per year. In the United States, we have a real GDP of $4,044. Okay, by the end of the period, it has $47,210 real GDP. So, annually, nag-increase siya at an average of 1.77 growth rate. Let's at, let us take notice of the growth rate. Pansinin natin ang growth rate. Kung mapansin nyo, okay, let's look at growth rate. Pansinin natin si growth rate. Tignan niyo si Japan. Okay, it has the highest growth rate at 2.65%. Okay? So meaning, okay, ang real GDP per person, okay, the living standard per person averages, okay, has an average increase of 2.65% per year. But at the beginning of the period, Japan is not one of the richest country. Okay? Tignan mo, konti lang ang difference nila with Mexico. Diba? And it's behind Germany. Okay? It's behind Canada and Argentina. Diba? But when you look at the end of the period, tingnan natin si real GDP ng Japan. It's at 34,810. No? So, makita mo ang progression ng kanilang country. Mabilis. Let's look at Bangladesh. Okay? Bottom siya ng growth rate. It's at 0.96% per year. Okay? So, tingnan natin to start. Okay? Si Bangladesh, kulala talaga at $629. Okay? Per person. By the end of the period, it's 1,800. So, slow talaga ang kanilang growth rate. So, meaning, dahil mahina ang kanilang growth rate, many of its citizens, okay, experience poverty. Okay? Poor talaga si Bangladesh. Okay? Let's look at the richest country by the start of the period. Okay? So, nangunguna si United Kingdom at 4,853. Okay? Next, si United States. But what happened? Okay? Ang growth rate sa United Kingdom, it's only at 1.43%. Okay? Though by the start of the period, nangunguna sila. Okay? Let's look at the end of the period. Okay? Ahead si United States na at 47,210 because United States has an annual growth rate of 1.77%. Diba? So what does this mean? Diba? So it shows that the world's richest country have no guarantee that they will stay the richest. And the world's poorest country are not doomed forever. May chance pa. Okay? Those in the poorest country, may pag-asa pa na not to remain in poverty. Ganun lang naman. So, what explains these changes over time? Why do some countries zoom ahead while others lag behind? These are the questions that we will tackle next. Okay, productivity, its role and determinants. Why productivity is so important. Okay, so to explain why income are so much higher in some countries than in others, we must look into the many factors that determine a nation's productivity. Living standard per countries is measured using the real GDP per person, as we have encountered. The real GDP is the capacity of producing goods and services, and to measure the capacity of producing goods and services, you need to look at the productivity. Let's go back at the famous novel about Robinson Crusoe, the sailor stranded on the desert island. So, di ba, si Robinson Crusoe, he catches his own fish, grows his own vegetable, makes his own clothes. It's considered a simple economy. Diba? Ang production niya, siya din ang nag-consume. Okay? So, looking at Crusoe's economy, okay, we can learn some lessons. How do we determine Crusoe's standard of living? Okay? So, di ba, ang productivity is the quantity of goods and services produced for each unit labor that is inputted. Okay? So, if Crusoe is good at catching fish, growing vegetables, and making clothes, he lives well. Okay? But if he is bad in doing these things, he lives poorly. So, it's because Crusoe gets to consume what he produces, his living standard is tied to his own productivity. Okay? Siya ang nag-produce, siya din ang nag-consume. Okay? So, ang kanyang living standard, okay, is being dictated by his productivity. Gets? Okay? Siya ang nag-produce, siya ang nag-consume. Okay? So, kung ano yung living standard niya, it will be dictated by how good he is. And let's say, catching fish, and growing vegetable, and making clothes. It will dictate his living standard. Okay? So it's clear that productivity is the key determinant of living standards, and that growth in productivity is the key determinant in growth in living standard. The more fish Crusoe can catch per hour, okay, the more he eats at dinner, diba? If Crusoe is better at growing vegetable, the more, okay, vegetables he can consume. Okay? The more clothes he makes, okay, marami siyang pwede i-pampalit na clothes. Okay. So, productivity is the key role in determining the living standard. Okay? It's true for Crusoe, it's true for nations. Okay. So, recall that the economic gross domestic product measures two things at once: the total income earned by everyone in the economy and the total expenditure on the economy's output of goods and services. Ganon ang measurement of gross domestic product. And GDP can measure these two things simultaneously. Okay? For the economy as a whole, they must be equal. Okay. So, to simply put it, an economist's income is the economy's output. So, ang question natin ngayon, why do some economies, okay, better at producing goods and services than others? Why are some countries good at producing goods and services than others? Yun ang question natin. How productivity is determined? Okay. Although productivity is important in determining the standard of living, there are many factors that determines productivity. Okay? Paano? Diba? You are more productive. Let's say, let's look at Crusoe. Okay? He's more productive, okay, if it catches more fish. But how can he catch more fish? Diba? Makakatch siya ng more fish if he has the fishing pole, he has the equipment. Okay? He had been trained, okay, to best fishing technique. Okay, so if his island has a plentiful fish supply, and if he invests at better fishing techniques, he's more productive. Gets? Okay? So each of these determinants are key to Crusoe's productivity. Okay? We have the physical capital, the human capital, natural resources, and technological knowledge. Okay? So, di ba? Complex ang determinants ng productivity. So, let's consider each factor. Physical capital per worker. Workers are more productive if they have tools to work with, diba? So the stock of equipment and structures used to produce goods and services are called physical capital or just capital. Okay? So 'di ba, pag let's say yung contractor, okay, merong new contractor. May nagkontrata siya ng bahay. Okay? His worker are more productive if meron siyang makabagong equipment. Okay? So ano ba yung mga bago ngayon? Kung dati, minamano pa na ang mga bakal, meron na tayong electric ngayon na pangkat ng mga bakal. So, madali na lang. Ano pa ba? With plastering. Kung dati, yung palitada, mano-mano pa. Okay? Yung surface ng wall, di ba? Yung smooth finish ng wall. Kung before, mano-mano, okay? Meron na tayong mga equipment ngayon na para dali na lang ang finishes. Okay? Pag-finish ng wall. So, di ba? It adds to the productivity of the contractor. Mas maganda yung equipment, mas madali ang trabaho, he can earn more. More tools, okay, allow to produce more output more quickly, more accurately. Okay? But a worker with the only basic hand tools, okay, a contractor with the basic hand tools, saw lang ang gamit niya, mano-mano na palitada, he can be less, no? Less ang kanyang productivity compared to others. Okay, diba? Okay? The input used to produce goods and services, labor, capital, are called factors of production. An important feature of capital is the produce factor of production. Meaning, okay, capital is the input into the production process, okay, and an output, okay, and that in the past was an output from the production process. Okay? So, the worker, okay? As you may recall, the input used to produce goods and services, the labor, capital, and so on, they are the factors of production. And an important feature of a capital is the produce factor of production. Okay? So, di ba, capital natin, ginagamit natin as input into the production process. But in the past, no, ginawa siyang output, okay, from the production process. Okay? What do we mean? Okay? So, let's say, a table. Okay? Let's say a table. Okay? Before assembling the table, we have the leg part. Okay? Yung leg part, okay, before it was used as a capital, okay, meron pang another process to make the leg of the table. Okay. So, the capital is a factor of production used to produce all kinds of goods and services, including more capital. Yun lang yun. Okay? Capital, we need it for production. And, okay, to produce goods and services, also, okay, and that includes another capital. Another determinant of productivity is the human capital. Okay, the knowledge and skill that workers acquire through education, training, and experience. The human capital per worker. Okay, so the human capital includes the skills accumulated from early childhood program, grade school, high school, college, on-the-job training. Okay, mga na-accumulate na training. Okay, and that includes our education. Okay? So education, training, and experience are less tangible than the tools that we've mentioned. Okay? Human capital is like physical capital in many ways. Okay? But, okay. So it's like, okay, di ba? Less tangible ang education, training, and experience. Okay? Mahirap siya i-quantify. Okay? Unlike the tools, di ba? Unlike the tools that we've mentioned in the physical capital. But they are, in a sense, the same, ang physical capital and human capital. Because human capital is is also a produce factor of production. So to produce human capital, it requires input, di ba? Like in the form of teachers, libraries, student time, okay, di ba? The investment in education, okay? So students can be viewed as workers who have the important job of producing the human capital that will be used in future production. Let's proceed to another, the natural resources per worker. The third determinant of productivity, okay, is natural resources. We are rich. Philippines is rich in resources. Okay, our land, our rivers, okay, our mineral deposits, and these natural resources takes in two forms. We have renewable and non-renewable. Okay? So, how does it differentiate? Okay? A forest is renewable. You can cut down a tree, but you can plant another to grow another tree. Okay? An example of non-renewable is oil. Okay? Because it produced, okay, by nature over many millions of years. So, hindi agad-agad, no? There is limited supply. So once it's depleted, okay, it's almost impossible to create more. Okay? So that may be one of the differences while why other countries are rich. Okay? They have a better standard of living compared to other countries. Okay? Okay? That's why countries like Kuwait, no? Saudi Arabia, okay, those in the Middle East, they are rich because they have this largest pool of oil in the world. Okay? While our country, like the Philippines, we rely mostly on agriculture. Okay? But of course, though it's one of the determinant, but natural resources, okay, though they are important, they are not necessarily needed for an economy to be highly productive. Bakit? Look at Japan. Okay? Japan is one of the richest country in the world despite having few natural resources. But, okay, due to international trading, okay, Japan imports many of the natural resources it needs, such as oil, okay, and exports its manufactured goods. That's why Japan is more progressive, di ba? Though limited ang kanilang natural resources, but they are trading. They can get it from other countries. Then we have the technological knowledge. Okay, fourth determinant of productivity. Okay, so to understand the best way to produce goods and services, no? That is technological knowledge. The society's understanding of the best way to produce goods and services. Okay, so R&D, diba? Research and development. Most Americans, okay, work on farms because farm technology required the high input of labor to feed the entire population. And because of the advances in farming technology, okay, small fraction na lang of population are needed to produce enough food to feed the entire country thanks to technological advancement. Okay? So, Um, maraming klase. Okay? It's one of the reason why Japan is so progressive, because they invest too much on technological knowledge, okay, and how to be productive. Okay, look at Toyota. No? Toyota was well known because of its productivity line, okay, assembly line. Okay, madali ang kanilang um, production of cars. Efficient and madali. Okay? So what's the difference between technological knowledge and human capital? Diba? They are closely related, of course, because technological knowledge, it develops if we develop our human capital. Okay? Hindi naman yan separate. No? Hindi naman mabubuo ang technological knowledge without the skilled human capital to do it. Okay? Technological knowledge refers to the society's understanding of how the world works. Human capital refers to the resources of expended, transmitting this understanding to the labor force. Okay? So knowledge is the quality of society's textbook, whereas the human capital is the amount of time that the population has devoted to reading them. Okay. So workers' productivity depends on both. Okay. So it also goes in the other way. Okay. We can produce, okay, textbook, okay, if we have the human capital, okay, to devote time into making them. Diba? So two-way, it can be a two-way. Okay? So far, we have determined the society's standard of living depends on the ability to produce goods and services. And the productivity depends on physical capital per worker, human capital per worker, natural resources per worker, and technological knowledge. Next, let's look at the question faced by policymakers around the world. What can government policy do to raise productivity and living standards?